And welcome to the joint Attivo and McAfee Partners in Protection workshop. Thank you very much for joining us today. We've got a great agenda and we're going to dive right in. But just before we do that, please note that this session is being recorded. And if you do need to drop off because of that, please do so now. We will be having a live Q&A towards the end of the session. So if you do have any questions, please submit them via the chat. And if you wouldn't mind, please ensure that you are on mute for the duration of the session. Thank you very much. And let's dive right in. So my name is Brian Brown. I've been with McAfee Enterprise for about 14 years. I'm an enterprise architect responsible for helping our customers define security solutions based on attributes to meet their business objectives. And I'm joined by my colleague, Joseph Salazar. Joseph, over to you for a second.
Hello, thank you for having me. So my name is Joseph Salazar. I've been in information security for about 22, 23 years, both private and public sector. I'm currently at Attivo Networks. I work in technical marketing. I pretty much do everything technical marketing related and have a really good understanding and grasp of the solutions that we offer. But my primary passion really is information security. It's why I've been doing it for so long.
Excellent, thank you. And honored to be joined by Joseph today. And I think we've got a great session together. McAfee Enterprise and Attivo have provided integrated solutions for a number of years that help our customers achieve a higher level of maturity in their security stack and a more effective architecture. And that's really the focus of our session today. So what is it that we're going to cover? Well, we'll quickly review the agenda. We'll start out by examining the security landscape, with a particular focus on the Security Operations Center or SOC environment. We'll take a look at the significance of integration and how that helps you and your SOC environment understand the various stages of the attack chain at a deeper level so that you can take the appropriate motions for up-leveling your defensive controls or even increasing your capability in the future. Next, we'll show you how a joint Attivo and McAfee enterprise solution come together with AD Secure, BotSync, mVision EPO, mVision Endpoint Protection, and EDR. And last, we'll wrap up with a quick summary and answer any questions that have come in via the chat. So let's take a look at the SOC environment. And the reality for many of you is likely reflected here. A recent study conducted by the analyst group ESG found that almost 2/3 of respondents felt that security analytics and operations have become much more difficult in the past couple of years. Whether it be tool sprawl, a lack of human capital resources, or the sophistication of threat actors, or maybe quite frankly, a combination of all three of those, many companies are struggling to be able to detect attacks and, most significantly, perform detection early enough in the attack lifecycle to save their company from significant impact. One of the potential conclusions that we can draw from these results is that defenders are really struggling in their job in the SOC to gain critical information, to perform detections early enough with the greatest level of efficacy to really understand their landscape, understand the impact of the incoming threats and what it is that they need to do to be able to interrupt those attackers as soon as they can. A SOC has a very diverse infrastructure that usually relies on a lot of tooling. And interestingly, the SOC isn't always the buying center for many of the tools that they inherit and are responsible for gathering data from and integrating into their environment. The same survey from ESG looked at how respondents looked at the landscape of their SOC environment and found that the vast majority of those who participated said that solutions that provide integration were extremely important to their overall success. And especially when you consider that many of those who participated in the survey were running over 30 different technologies as part of their SOC environment. The value of integrated solutions is widely recognized as a key enabler to help with many of the struggles the SOC faces today, when attackers are so active and so prolific in their malicious activities. Having numerous telemetry sources at your fingertips is not enough. Telemetry feeds must make sense of the context of in the context of the overall architecture. And that's where those key integrations really come into play to help enable the SOC. It's critical to think about the architecture of the security stack, including the processes that drive the ability to detect, investigate, respond, and remediate to threats. And the front end of most security operations capabilities lies in the collection, curation, synthesis, and dissemination of threat intelligence. Understanding the risks posed to an organization requires knowledge of the threat landscape and potential inbound activity which could impact your org. Managing risk means having a good perspective on not just what threats are present, but the velocity and the potential impact of those. What are they destined for me, and how much do I need to worry about a specific threat? And I need to combine that with a perspective of whether or not I'm vulnerable. Synthesizing threats requires data and context that's relevant to your specific configurations, along with a detailed campaign information to be able to compare and contrast actor activity, tool sets that they're using and that are being leveraged by those threat actors, and importantly, understanding the techniques that are used by those threat actors so that you can compare and contrast that with your defensive posture. This is the process of what I like to call turning threat intelligence into threat wisdom. The ability to not only understand a threat, but to know what to do about it and when to take action. That's the first step in a defensive architecture. And building on that threat wisdom, the technical analysis of attack chains is invaluable to be able to determine a proportional response to the threat. Is the actor attempting to gain initial access to your environment? Or have they already established a beachhead and we need to take immediate quarantining actions? Perhaps the breach has reached the stage of an additional reconnaissance activity using lull-bin techniques with native OS tools that are difficult to determine whether or not they're being used as part of normal operations or maliciously. If the actor has already exfiltrated data, do I need to raise the red flag immediately and determine the extent of the exposure? Each one of these steps in the attack chain may require layered capabilities to be able to have a full scope analysis of what actions have been taken by the malicious actor. Blind spots mean missed data and context that could be significant in determining how, when, and where to react. And this really brings up the subject of detecting early, not at the end of the attack chain after the attacker has already exfiltrated your data, but earlier and sooner, when they're going through their initial stages of compromise and establishing their beachhead. This is when we look at the factor of dwell time, the time between the attacker's entry into your environment and them executing many malicious activities. And unfortunately, time is the attacker's friend. And the more time they have to set up their attack scenario, the more of a foothold they're able to gain in your environment. In order to achieve detection as early as possible in the attack chain, let's introduce that concept of time-based security. By creating an architecture that is able to detect attacks earlier in the attack lifecycle, the more we mitigate the potential impact. For example, ransomware attacks don't start with encryption. Attackers need to gain access to your environment, perform additional discovery, and potentially lateral movement before delivering their malicious payloads. The multiple stages that can be mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and create opportunities for earlier detection and attack disruption by defensive teams, the purpose of our workshop today. Using a commonly known scenario, that of the Colonial Pipelines attack, analysis of the dark side malware, for example, that was used demonstrates that there is evidence that multiple capabilities like EDR and deception technologies would detect many of these early actions with a high degree of confidence well before there's any exfiltration activity. There's also visibility on other early stage techniques such as C2, discovery, and privilege escalation. So let's take a practical example of this. To demonstrate how effective our joint solution can be, we're going to show you a scenario in a controlled environment. So Joseph, could you walk us through a little bit of detail around the timelines that we're going to investigate?
Certainly. So what we're going to see in this demonstration is the attacker's timeline and then what the defenders are actually doing. So we're going to see an initial compromise. We're going to see local system recon. So they're going to be checking things out on the local system. We're actually going to see a remote compromise. In this case, they're going to be going after a Jira server. And they're going to be doing remote recon and then compromise or another remote asset, which in this case is SCADA. Now, the interesting about this is that across that entire chain after initial compromise, the Attivo and McAfee solutions will actually detect and derail those attacks. So let's go ahead and go over to the video. Oh, sorry. In that timeline, I'm sorry, I forgot about the slide. In that timeline, we're going to show incident response from the defender's timeline. We're going to show the triage of the investigation. We're going to show a network block. So we're going to do an immediate response to buy us time after that initial triage. Then we're going to do a full investigation. We're going to do some threat hunting to find additional compromised hosts. And then we're actually going to do remediation and show that the attacker's foothold has been neutralized. And now the great part about this is that the earlier you get that initial detection and the earlier you can respond to that attack, the less damage the attacker is likely to do, the less of a foothold they can establish inside the network, and the greater your chances of defending against this attack.
Awesome. So let's jump over into our controlled situation, which we've taken as a video exercise here. So we'll flip over to that right now.
All right, great. So what you're seeing here as the initial view is a victim system, and the command windows that you're seeing are showing the command and control console that the attacker is using to compromise the system. So the attacker has sent a malicious document with embedded PowerShell that calls back to the command and control server when it gets opened. Now the attacker gets the callback, which sets up an implant 81. Note that it evades the anti-malware scan interface and then injects shellcode. Now, the attacker is going to switch over to the remote console and run the following commands. The whoami command lists the currently logged on user, and then the net user command enumerates the groups to which the user belongs. Note the output on the left-hand screen. Now, the attacker is then going to invoke the Mimikatz privilege debug command to set debug rights to extract in-memory credentials. And then he's going to run the securl sa command, which lists all available provided credentials and usually shows the recently logged on user and computer accounts. Now, the output's going to take a few moments, but what Mimikatz is doing is scraping RAM and dumping all the credentials, including the decoy credentials that Attivo has seeded into memory. And this is something he does not know. So as you see, the output has shown up, and once Mimikatz dumps credentials and hashes, the attacker will search for interesting entries to reuse. Now, the attacker finds the decoy Jira credentials, which you'll highlight over here, as well as the Jill Benefield user credential. So the attacker now switches over to the victim view and pastes the credentials to the clipboard. Now, he's going to open up a web browser so that he can connect to that Jira server whose address he found in the credential dump. Now, once he connects to that Jira server, he's going to use that Jill Benefield credential that he scraped from memory to log on to the Jira server. And then once he's successfully logged on, he's just going to take a look around to see what's there. Now, what he does not know is that this Jira server that he's connecting to is actually a decoy. So at this stage of the attack, the Attivo environment has derailed the attack to a decoy rather than a production asset. So now the attacker is going to switch back to his remote console and then scan for open ports. Now, specifically, he's going to scan for Modbus on port 502. And he's going to specify a range of IP addresses from 10.1.0.1 to 109. And note that the attacker is identifying the open port on 10.1.0.108. So he's got a result from that port scan. So now the attacker is going to switch back to the victim system, and he's going to use that same browser to connect to port 502 on that target IP address 10.1.0.108. Now, when he connects to this system, it's going to look like a GE relay system, but actually it is in fact another decoy. Note that it's going to display all the same entries that a real GE relay system would, from the customer service contacts to the memory mappings of devices that are currently in the environment that this relay system is managing. So now let's switch from the attacker's view to the defender's view. Now this is the Attivo Networks BotSync dashboard. At the top are the events based on time filter, and they're going to show events by the attack phases and the severity and by recent events. Now these are the events of the activities that we just witnessed. Now switching to the analysis tab gives us a look at the events, and note that the event times and types that he's looking at, and then look at the details, which shows the credentials use and the HTTP connections. So he scrolls down, you'll notice that we've identified the Jill Benefield credential, which is in fact a fake credential, and all the assorted connection attempts. So now we're going to switch over to the network view, which shows the visual depiction of the decoy environment that the attacker is interacting with. Now the network map shows the different types of decoys, and we're going to highlight the SCADA decoy here. So this is the decoy of that GE system. Now let's switch to the view back to the events, and we can see the details of the SCADA VM interactions. Now, selecting the endpoint report, the endpoint blocking report on the dashboard shows us the initial access vector. Now, note the level of the details. We're showing the processes, specifically things like Mimikatz and PowerShell, and all the commands and processes that the attacker used on the victim system to execute the attack. So there's a lot of useful information here that we're going to use for threat hunting, as well as initial triage, as just the initial triage. So now that we've completed triage, we can now initiate a response. So here we're using the McAfee EPO integration to quarantine the compromised system. And it's really simply a matter of choosing that quarantine action. And so let's switch over to the system. We're going to, now that the system is quarantined, we're going to check the browser activity to show that the victim system has no network access. So let's connect to bbc.com to see if there's any kind of activity. And notice the spinning wheel, there's nothing going on there. So let's try Google. And again, notice there is no connectivity. And at some point, we should get the timeout saying that there's no network connection and the access is blocked. So let's switch over to the blocked endpoint tab and get a view of the endpoints that we've blocked, along with the time to live, which in this case is 1.5 minutes as configured. So let's take a quick look at that integration for the McAfee details. If you can pause it right here, Brian. Great. So this is the McAfee integration tab for the Attivo console, where the user can configure the EPO integration. And the configuration is really very simple. The user just has to provide the destination IP and port for that EPO console, for that management console, as well as a username and password. And then optionally, you'll notice down at the bottom, you can specify whether you're going to do auto blocking based on an alert severity. And note also, we're going to set a quarantine duration, a time to live, of 90 seconds, which is at 1.5 seconds that I highlighted earlier when we showed that endpoint blocking tab. Now let's go ahead and continue. So really the configuration is very simple. And now we're going to switch over to Brian, who will cover the McAfee side of the incident response. Brian?
Thanks, Joseph. That's a great viewpoint from the attacker's perspective and some of what the Attivo deception technology brings into play. Let's flip over into McAfee's ePolicy Orchestrator console and take a look at what we see from an alert perspective, and then we'll pivot over into EDR and take a look at how the attack visualization unfolds through that integration solution. But that whole aspect of how easy it is to integrate the Attivo and McAfee solutions together really comes into play in terms of the richness of telemetry that we receive through the two solutions. And immediately you can see here in EPO, we have multiple different types of threat events which we've received through the integrated solution. And if we play the video, we can click on the details of any one of those events and see further information such as the time it occurred, the alert type, the severity, all of that is built in as part of the integration. Here, we specifically saw some OS credential dumping. And interestingly, I'll pause for just a second. You can also see in play, we have McAfee's EPP solution, our endpoint protection technology. And what we've done in this scenario so that we can illustrate how much visibility there is in the joint solution, we've actually put the advanced threat protection module into observe mode. And so we see some alerts that actually would have been generated, and the ATP module would have stopped the attack scenario if we had actually allowed it to do so. But for the interest of being more illustrative, we've actually just put that into observation mode. If we look around a little bit more, what you're going to see is that there are specific types of activity that were being conducted, such as file and directory discovery. And importantly, we're going to be able to click into the details of any one of those so that there's that full richness of information for the defender to gain that perspective around the joint solution. But if we pivot over into EDR, let's pause here for 1 second and think about the details of what has been presented. So on the left-hand side, you can see threats that have been surfaced in EDR by their ranking. And we've listed that Word document that was used as part of the initial stages of compromise as a high severity alert. You can also see immediately some other details such as the MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-256 hashes that are associated with the document. And we could even take action directly here in the EDR console. Now, fortunately, through that joint integration between Attivo and McAfee, we've already quarantined the system. And what that does is it gives the defender more time and ability to go through their process of triage and forensics while still containing the threat adequately. We can also see further details on the right-hand side and techniques that are mapped to the MITRE matrix, and a complete process view around what actually occurred when the WinWord document was actually used for the initial exploitation. Some of the following on processes like PowerShell and the who am I and net commands that Joseph referred to earlier. We can also take a look at the impacted devices. In this case, there's one device that's impacted. And importantly, I also want to point out the fact that not only could we take actions on the system itself, such as stopping the process, stopping and removing the process, and quarantining the device, which has already occurred, we can also pivot over and look at a historical trace of data. So part of the value of that joint integration is that not only are we receiving real-time telemetry and events between the two McAfee and Attivo technologies, but we're also able to use the EDR console to be able to go back in time and look at historical tracing, helping us understand, although there was an alert that was surfaced, what were some of the events that led up to that scenario actually causing this high severity alert. And so what we're going to do is look at some of that trace information around the process. You can see that we can receive the granular details, including the full path of execution for any one of these processes as we click on it. We can see the actual command line that was executed by the PowerShell command, that lull-bin technique that threat actors often use, and all of the associated details like the SHA-256 hash. And now what we can do is use EDR to say, is this indicator present on other devices and simply hasn't been actualized as of yet? So it could be present in the environment, but dormant. So we could look for the file on this device. We obviously know it's there in this scenario, but we can also pivot over and look at multiple systems simultaneously. And if we select that, what you'll see is the console builds out its search criteria is that not only is that indicator present on the one system that we were looking at that's caused the initial alert, but we also see that indicator present on multiple other systems in the environment and simply hasn't been actualized as of yet. And now what we can do is we can take immediate actions to contain it across all of our systems, not just the one that caused the initial alert to be surfaced in the EDR console, but we can take these actions across the entire scope of the 3 systems that are impacted in this scenario, by name, by hash, by PID, and we can even quarantine all three of these devices simultaneously if that's a desirable activity for the defender to take in this scenario. So if we take a look at this from a historical perspective, that's great. That's the past. We've also been able to capture that real-time information and say, are those indicators present across these systems? So we're combining both the device capability that you see here, the real-time tracing, and now the historical tracing. And the historical tracing time frame is very flexible. We can select up to 24 hours before or after the actual initiation of the alert event. We can go for a custom time frame and even search back into number of days so that we can see the event flow that potentially led up to system being compromised through the use of that WinWord document. You can see all different types of collectors that are being leveraged by EDR, such as scripts that are run, dual intent tools like PowerShell, for example, all the services that have been spawned on the system, network connections, and a lot more. But importantly, we're going to focus on some of the detections and alerts down here. Most significantly, those 31 alerts that have been raised. And you can see some of those PowerShell activities that were part of the attack. And this is where it really comes into clear focus around how the detections affect the visibility for the defender and what it is that they can actually see. And you can see right here in the middle, there's that WinWord document, which was part of the exploitation chain. We're going to bring up a quick console. And one of the things that is a secondary and very powerful integration capability between Attivo and McAfee is that now we're going to run some scripts. And we're going to take some detections from Attivo, and we're going to use the integrated API capability between our two solutions and the historical search function within EDR to look across the environment. We can look for things like the hashes associated with malicious processes, which have been surfaced in either Attivo or in McAfee EDR. We can search for additional C2 connections, and we can also execute reactions to kill processes and remove those specific hashes and those indicators that could be present. And so what you can see right now is that we're looking for, we're integrating with the AD Secure solution. We're gathering additional information around, in this case, looking for network connections that could be relevant as part of the attack chain. And all of that information is then used to build up a set of response actions, which the defender can take to quarantine the threat, to remove all of those malicious indicators, and ensure that the environment has been completely remediated to the maximum extent possible. And a lot of this is driven, as I said, through the integration between our two solutions, between Attivo and McAfee, to be able to execute those activities. And what you can see here is that we have the ability to terminate some of those processes on the affected systems. And as we start to build out, we'll see the complete response. And when we get to the final stages of the integration capability, we will see that no longer is the attacker able to execute any of their activities. And importantly, things like the PowerShell process that was used as part of the attack is no longer present in the environment. So we've gone through direct integration and remediation of the threat from both the Attivo and McAfee perspective. And now we can close things off by actually having the defender input a final entry that the threat has now been contained. There we go. So hopefully that's given you a great idea as to how the joint McAfee and Attivo solution works in practice. And what we'll do is we'll just flip back over into our scenario here and come back on. All right, so Both McAfee and Attivo share the perspective that we're better together. Both of our organizations have created solutions that are built for interoperability that enable a defensive architecture that works hand in hand to detect, monitor, and importantly, remediate attacks. By sharing the local intelligence that is detected at multiple layers of the architecture and executing actions and responses between our two technologies, we've proven that we can reduce dwell time, detect, scope, and triage from the defender's perspective more quickly to make SOC operations more effective. And as you look to increase the capabilities of your SOC, think about what we have shown via the demonstration today with BotSync, integrated with McAfee's mVision EDR, EPP, and EDO. This integrated capability allows your organization to be more proactive, more responsive, and mitigate more risks with our joint solution. Our joint solution also enables the enrichment of your SIM and threat intelligence data, as well as data that includes network context and attacker actions via decoys and endpoints. We're the only joint solution that provides the visibility to attacks targeting Active Directory via Attivo AD Secure that also fits into a larger framework, enabling expansion to other areas such as cloud security, orchestration, and more, all key goals for the SOC environment and improvement. So, what is it that we've shown you today? Well, hopefully through the demonstration and some of the lessons learned through what Joseph and I have depicted, we understand now that it's not just about having intelligence at your fingertips and having telemetry. It's about being able to tie all these aspects together in a contextualized way. And that's where the joint solution really shows off the benefits of the defensive architecture, to be able to detect early, to reinforce that idea of time-based security and bring that into the defender's capability. Detection, deception, investigation, and response all need to work together as part of a cohesive whole and process. And echoing some of those desires from the ESG survey, integration is key, and that's exactly what we've shown you. Better together. Ultimately, what is it that McAfee and Attivo jointly promise? An increase in capability, an increase in maturity level of your capabilities for your SOC, better detections, earlier detections, and an easy ability to leverage the power of our joint solutions together. So, what is our call to action? For those of you who might be interested in understanding a little bit more, one of the places that's a good area to start is on the McAfee Marketplace, where we have a panel that lists the joint solution between McAfee and Attivo. You can go there and find more information. And if you already have both of our technologies in play, you can even start a free trial right off of the marketplace. Additionally, please feel free to reach out to any of us, and we'd be more than happy to talk to you about the capabilities of a Attivo and McAfee joint solution together. So with that, we're going to turn to Q&A. So Helena, I wonder if you would mind seeing whether or not we have any questions that have been posed to us in the chat.
Thanks, Brian. That was great. And actually, we do have a question, and I think I'll direct this one to you. It says, does McAfee have an orchestration solution that integrates with Attivo?
Yeah, great question. I think we've been able to demonstrate that there's a lot of automation, the task automation that we can perform immediately between our two solutions. Personally, I look at orchestration as a higher level capability where we might want to have conditional workflows, different branches of execution. And to really execute that, to do that, to deliver on that full scope capability requires an orchestration platform. There's a lot to be gained through the automation of tasks. I think as we clearly demonstrated with the video today between our joint solutions, that in many cases obviates a lot of the need or desire to move directly to orchestration out of the gate. It's a journey. I'm not saying you don't need it, but I think there's a lot of immediate value that you can get through just the task automation between McAfee and Attivo solutions that gets you down that road towards having more capability without looking outside to an orchestration platform specifically.
Fantastic. Thank you. Joseph, we have one here for Attivo. It says, it seems like the Attivo solution requires deploying decoys. How long does it take to get it up and running?
So the beautiful part about the way the Attivo solution works is that you can get up and running in as little as an hour. And that's from unboxing the appliance or spinning up the VM, on premises or in the cloud, until it deploys its first set of decoys and configures the decoy credentials. And we do that through a process of automated learning. And so once you first connect the system to the network, it's going to automatically learn the profiles of all the VLANs that it has visibility to based on what you give it. And so it's going to automatically custom craft the decoys to fit into each of those VLANs. So for example, if you have a VLAN that is primarily Windows systems with a few services and maybe some Mac and Linux, then it's going to create decoys in approximately those those ratios with the appropriate services that it sees from that VLAN. And a different VLAN is going to have a different mix of systems and services. So it's going to show different ports and services on that VLAN. And then it nominates this deployment. It's going to set up the IP addresses, assign them to the decoys, and all you have to do is review and approve. And then once you approve it, it's already deployed. For the endpoint component, it automatically crafts based on information from your Active Directory. It's going to create credentials, decoy credentials that will fit in, and that will then create an executable that you can distribute to any or all of your endpoints. And then it drops the credentials into memory, into storage, into the credential manager, into the keychain, every place that you would normally store end user credentials on the endpoint. And then you are deployed. And again, that can take as little as an hour, depending on the size of the environment and the number of VLANs that you give it visibility to.
Thank you, Joseph. I have another question here. And Brian, it says, can I enhance the detections from Attivo and McAfee with my own threat intel?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and we talked at the start of the session around the importance of having good intelligence and being able to use that to better understand and scope attacks, even before they have potentially hit your environment. The short answer to the question is yes. We can absolutely enhance the perspective of threat intelligence that is defined through a local context, through the McAfee and Attivo detections of what we see in the environment, with additional threat intelligence from outside external sources, such as ISACs or government feeds, for example. And that is accomplished through the McAfee DXL or data exchange layer infrastructure to be able to have a repository of threat intelligence which comes from both local and external sources, and defines the reputation which a customer can set based on their own parameters. You can inherit a reputation that comes from a threat intel provider and says the sample is malicious, but you can also set your own reputations for definition of what are defined as enterprise levels of malicious activity on top of what is set by the external provider. And so all of that really fits into the perspective of enriching the environment for better detections earlier that we talked about with the aspect of time-based security.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Interesting question. It says, I'm on the Attivo webpage, and I've always known Attivo as a deception company, but yet you guys are talking about identity detection and response. So Joseph, can you take that one?
Sure. So IDR, identity detection response, is a emerging technology that we're trying to develop, and a lot of that is because there are XDR, EDR solutions, network, traffic analysis. There are a bunch of solutions that focus on the actual activities that attackers doing. But there's nothing that really focuses on what they're actually targeting, which in this case, just about every attacker targets an identity, whether it's a credential or something within the cloud. And they do that because it's how they move around. They're impersonating a legitimate user. And they do that by co-opting this user's identity and then using the privileges associated with that identity and entitlements that are associated with that identity to move around, access data, and get to the things they want to get to. And so we thought that, and this isn't a departure from what we're doing before, because what we're doing is we're looking for credential theft, lateral movement, privilege escalation, discovery, but all of those things impact identity. And so we decided to sort of help with this emerging technology by focusing on protecting the actual identity itself. So we haven't abandoned our deception technology. It's actually how we orchestrate a lot of what we do, but we have focused on protecting identities as an asset, which not a lot of controls have been doing. Now, there are solutions out there that are looking to protect identities themselves. And we're not talking about identity access management or privilege access management or multi-factor authentication and password saves. Those are protecting credentials, right? They're protecting the mechanisms that you use to log in, but they're not protecting the actual identity, because an identity is associated with a privilege, authentication, and authorization. Versus the mechanisms that actually do those things. And so we have pivoted and we have focused. And I think that as an emerging technology solution, IDR is a field that is adjacent to and will enhance all of the other solutions that you have, like EDR and XDR and network traffic analysis and all of those other things that are meant to stop an attacker from either compromising or moving around laterally, except in this case, we're just focusing on the identity piece of it.
Okay, thanks, Joseph. And Brian, Joseph, it looks like that's it for our questions today.
Great.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you joining on this session. And hopefully we've been able to demonstrate the value of the integration between McAfee and Attivo solutions. Thanks for your time. Look forward to seeing you again.